Chapter 11: The Visit Home, the Fit Lady, and an Unexpected Guest. Freiman was paying a home visit, not in his capacity as a social worker in the municipal health service, but simply to see his father and his partner. His mother had passed away 7 years earlier from breast cancer that had metastasized. She was only 55, far too young. The disease progressed rapidly, and once it had spread, there was little that could be done. Freeman's father had been only 58 at the time. Losing his wife had been a devastating blow. Not only a punch to the gut, but a heartbreaking fracture in the happiness they had built together over more than 30 years. Yet, not long after her passing, he had a hard time flirting with the fit woman from the local gym. She happened to be the ex-girlfriend of Sigmund, a colleague from down in Valbakken. They had tried to be discreet, but the entire neighborhood had noticed them taking walks together and attending concerts. The gossip spread quickly. Naturally, Freiman did not come home very often after his mother's death. But now it was time to visit his father at least. The fit lady, Mrs. Bravol's ex-wife, wasn't much older than Freiman himself. She was pleasant and cheerful, yet there was something rather greedy, almost vulgar, about her appearance, her full lips, her revealing neckline, and the way she carried herself. She worked for a while as an instructor at the Spence Fitness Center and was widely known simply as the Spence Lady. To be fair, she looked great, fit and attractive. Perhaps she carried a couple of extra pounds, but nowadays people simply call that curvy, an advantage rather than a flaw. That his old man had managed to win her over was almost unbelievable. Now she was sitting comfortably in the living room, sipping an Irish coffee. His father was making pleasant small talk and telling jokes. Nothing suggested that the visit would be awkward. Suddenly, the Spence lady perked up. A curious sparkle lit her eyes and she blurted out, "I think it's cool that Trump is so aggressive, and his proposals are actually good." Freeman's father leaned back, collecting himself before taking a deep breath. It was an astonishing, indeed, shocking, remark. Strangely enough, politics had never come up during the short time they had known each other. In fact, he had deliberately tried to avoid both politics and religion, fully aware of how explosive those subjects could be. Whenever related topics surfaced, the conversation seemed to lose its ease, as though both of them instinctively understood how dangerous it might be to venture further. Besides, he knew that the Spence lady had once been active in the Pentecostal congregation Philadelphia. Her ex-husband, Bravol, had reportedly held a leading position in that church. Freiman immediately recognized the warning signs and deftly steered the conversation toward music and art, his own field. His father took the hint and asked how life was as an artist was going. Freiman had plenty to talk about. His trip to Magdeburg naturally received considerable attention, and most of the facts surrounding the journey became rather generously embellished. The Spence lady stood up and disappeared into the bathroom. Everything was perfectly ordinary, except that the two related gentlemen could not help themselves. Their eyes wandered exactly where most men's eyes tend to wander. Not a word was spoken, just silent acknowledgement. That was simply how it was. Silence. Consensus. Although this author is hardly an expert in psychology, it seems plausible to assume that this had something to do with the strict rules of earlier generations concerning proper behavior and accepted social conventions. The point became immediately apparent when the Spence lady returned from the bathroom, casually dropped into her armchair, stretched out her legs, and leaned back comfortably. Just then, the doorbell rang. The father of the house sprang to his feet, hurried to the door, and there stood none other than Jens Stoltenberg, the prominent politician, former Prime Minister of Norway, and long-serving Secretary General of NATO. Freeman's father and Jens were close friends, and naturally he was invited into the living room for an Irish coffee. Jens sat down immediately and launched into the reason for his visit: the situation in Europe. Tensions were extremely high. Donald Trump had withdrawn from the peace negotiations with Putin and the other parties involved. He had pulled both himself and his representatives out of every forum, leaving Europe and Ukraine to fend for themselves. He was thoroughly fed up with all the complaining and endless bickering between them. Everyone seemed to despise one another, and there was no realistic prospect of peace. Jens Stoltenberg urged everyone to remain faithful to the solid social democratic path on which they had been raised, and not to look either to the right or to the left. The Spence lady disagreed.